My name is Paul Cantor, and I'm a professor of English at the University of Virginia, and I'd like to say a few words of introduction to this series of lectures on Shakespeare and Politics. This is essentially just a live record of a course I gave on the subject. I won't say it was unprofessionally done, but I'll just say this was not a studio recording, and I hope you'll put up with that fact. The lectures were all spontaneous. I lectured from notes, but not from a prepared text. I did note I made some factual mistakes at various points. Sometimes I try to correct them. Eventually, we're going to try to attach to this website a series of corrections. But, for example, I think the first time I mentioned the beheading of Charles I, I referred to him as Charles II. I misspelled Lord Burleigh's name once on the blackboard, but I hope you'll put up with those kind of minor errors. The camera work is pretty basic. Sometimes it follows me to the blackboard, to what I'm writing. Sometimes it doesn't. We did have a few problems along the way. There's one lecture where I had laryngitis, but it does appear that my voice was audible. One of the lectures was lost, and so we had to redo it in a different setting, and that will be somewhat jarring, but again, I don't think it will spoil things for you. The lectures are geared to the signet editions of Shakespeare's plays. Those were the ones I used in the class, and so you will hear page numbers, line references. They're always to the signet edition. In case you don't know, there is no standard lineation of Shakespeare's plays, and so if you have another edition, things may be a little bit off, but usually I read the passages. Usually you'll be able to find them in any edition. It was a class. Frequently, I make reference to class matters like when the exam is. You don't have to worry about that. I took questions from the class. Sometimes I'm afraid the questioners may be inaudible, but again, don't worry about that. I think basically the message of the lectures gets across. Sometimes I think we're a little bad on picking up the exact beginning of a lecture. I'll also say it's in the nature of a lecture that I don't cite everything. I'm often, in fact, using ideas I've gotten from literary critics. Sometimes I do cite them. I do make some recommendations of reading. Again, for the website that will accompany this, I will try to prepare a bibliography that will indicate some of my intellectual indebtedness, but again, I apologize for some time. In the nature of a lecture, you often use other people's ideas without having a chance to cite them. So that's basically it. Those are the few details I'd like you to be aware of if you're watching these lectures, and I hope that you enjoy them and learn something from them. Okay, I think I'll get started. It looks like Harvard, in its infinite wisdom, came up with the right size room for the class, so I'm going to try to get a count of how many of you are actually taking the course at the end. Okay, my name's Paul Cantor. I'm a professor of English at the University of Virginia. So what am I doing teaching a government course at Harvard University? Well, actually, this is a kind of nostalgic moment for me. The first course I ever taught was here at Harvard in the English department and called Shakespeare and Politics. So I have taught the English department here. Shakespeare and Politics has been the main focus of my academic career. I did teach a course very similar to this back in 2007 in the government department. If Harvard had minors, I would have been a minor in government. I took about 4 courses in government as an undergraduate here and audited 4 more. So in some ways, I think of myself as a child of the Harvard government department. So it's not as anomalous as it may seem at first. I'm going to just try to introduce you to what the course is going to be about today and lay out some of the housekeeping details of the course. But let's start with the big picture. This is going to be a course in Shakespeare as a political thinker. I won't call him a political theorist because he didn't write treatises and present his ideas in the form of theory, but I do want to suggest that he is a major political thinker worthy to stand in the line of the great political thinkers. We'll be talking a good deal about Plato and Aristotle in this course, because I think Shakespeare is in many ways their heir. And in some fundamental ways, this course is a study of what Plato and Aristotle called the regime, that word that in Greek is politeia, the idea that the nature of the political community shapes the nature of the human beings who live under it. I think that's in some ways the fundamental principle of Shakespeare's drama, that the reason he offers us such a wide range of human types in his plays, for which he is justifiably famous, is that he explores a wide range of political regimes. In this course, we're going to be looking at ancient republics and ancient empire, at modern monarchies, at modern republics. In each of these cases, Shakespeare tries to connect the particular kind of human being that's developed in the political community with the structure, the form of rule in that community itself. Names of Plato and Aristotle will come up a lot in this course. The name of Machiavelli will come up a great deal. I think that Shakespeare had read Machiavelli. There's a good bit of evidence to that effect, and that he used Machiavelli in his understanding, particularly of ancient Rome, but of the modern world as well. That's why I'm asking you to read Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy along with the Shakespeare plays that we're studying. There are many ways to treat the subject of Shakespeare and politics, and I want to make an effort at defining what's special about my approach in this course. That is, there are many attempts to relate Shakespeare to the politics of his day, and to show that he, in one way or another, reflects the politics of his day. There was a long period of Shakespeare scholarship when Shakespeare was studied in light of Elizabethan common opinion, and his plays were mined for learning what the average Englishman of Shakespeare's day thought about politics. I've never been too attracted to that approach, because I don't think of Shakespeare as an average Englishman or an average anything. And I don't think the plays would be all that interesting if they merely introduced us to the average thought of his day. I will try to present Shakespeare to you as someone very unusual, perceptive, and profound in his thought. I can crystallize the issue for you by looking very briefly at the first play we're going to be dealing with, Shakespeare's Coriolanus. This play was probably written 1608, 1609. In 1607, there was an insurrection, kind of agrarian insurrection in England, people protesting the famine, the lack of grain. And you will see that Coriolanus opens with a group of Roman plebeians protesting the dearth, as they call it, the lack of grain in Rome. And I think it's understandable that many people have connected these two facts. Here's a protest over scarcity of food in Shakespeare's day, and here's a scene like that in one of his Roman plays. And then certain devilish people come along and point out that Shakespeare was a landowner, a rather substantial owner. He made a lot of money in the theater and invested it in land, and so you get people arguing, well, Shakespeare owned all this farmland. Surely he must have been opposed to this insurrection against food prices, and you get some rather nasty things said about Shakespeare as a result. In fact, as you'll see, Shakespeare is rather sympathetic to these Romans in their protests against the price of grain in Rome. Doesn't seem to take some programmatic position as a landowner would. In any case, what I would say is that the facts of Shakespeare's day are related to the play, surely, in working up this scene of an urban riot. He may have been drawing upon experience he had in his own day, but nevertheless, he is definitely showing this material in a Roman context, and he shows his understanding of how things differed in the world of ancient Rome, particularly these early days of the Roman Republic. And he is attempting to show something distinctive about that Roman condition. Another thing that people do in trying to look at contemporary politics, England at this point was being ruled by James I, who was in many ways an arbitrary monarch claiming more power than English monarchs had before, gravitating towards absolute power, the very issues that produced the rebellion against Charles I later in the 17th century. And it so happens that in some of James's rhetoric, he referred to Rome. Parliament was reasserting its rights against James, and in some of James's speeches, he referred to the tribunes in the English Parliament. Now, we're going to be looking a lot at the tribunes next time. This was a distinctive institution of the Roman Republic. And again, people try to say that somehow Coriolanus, the character of Coriolanus, is Shakespeare's portrait of James I. And it may well be that his perception of James somehow factors into the play. But again, Shakespeare knew he was living under a monarchy, and he is very carefully portraying the Roman Republic in Coriolanus, as I'll show. So that's the sort of thing I have in mind. Many of the approaches to Shakespeare's politics, in a sense, level out what to me is most interesting in the plays. They treat the plays as somehow all dealing directly with Shakespeare's England. I certainly would say that they indirectly deal with Shakespeare's England, and in some cases, as in Henry V, they deal directly with Shakespeare's England because they're set in Shakespeare's England. But what I want to look at in this course is a wide variety of the political settings of Shakespeare's plays, with the understanding that that's the heart of his teaching about politics. It is an effort to understand what it is to live under a republic, what it is to live under a monarchy, how that shapes more than just people's political actions, but how it shapes their whole lives. And the other major issue we'll be looking at is religion, how the living under different religions shapes people's outlooks in the world. That's why I've arranged the syllabus the way I have. Now, you've all had access to the syllabus, right? You've seen it. I'm just checking on that. I've, as a visitor, had little problems getting a computer set up, and I still can't get into my own website. Fortunately, I brought an iPad with me, and with that, I can get in with no problem. So I have been able to see my own syllabus. But if anyone, for some reason, doesn't have access to the syllabus, I brought some hard copies with me, and I'll be happy to hand them out. Let me just talk now briefly about the sort of housekeeping details in the course, and then I'll try to go through and give you an outline of it. The texts are all in at the coop. I checked last week when I got here. I'm asking you to get the Mansfield-Tarkoff translation of Discourses on Livy, which is the best translation, and a literal one, which will be helpful to us. I'll just say I'm not going to be lecturing much on Machiavelli directly. I'm asking you to read that book both as background on Roman history itself. You will learn a great deal about the Roman Republic, and several of the figures we'll be studying in the course from reading that. And also, I think I'm not claiming that Shakespeare was a Machiavellian. In fact, just the opposite. I think he disagreed with Machiavelli on fundamental issues, and we'll look into that. But at many points, it will be helpful to have Machiavelli as a point of comparison with Shakespeare. And I'll tell you right now, as is explained on the syllabus, the first paper assignment will be asking you to take one chapter of the discourses and apply it to one of the plays we've read. Essentially, that will be in the Roman plays, the way I've got the papers scheduled. So I do advise you get started reading the discourses. I don't want every paper to be about book 1, chapter 1 of the discourses. Now, for the Shakespeare plays itself, I'm asking you to get the Signet Classic editions. They are among the cheapest, I'm happy to say. They also, I think, are among the best. They're generally well annotated. They explain the dirty jokes better than most editions that I know of. They're more honest about that. And they generally have some good essays and bibliography in the back, and they tend to have good excerpts from Shakespeare's sources. And this will be particularly useful to you when we're studying the Roman plays. This is the case where Shakespeare wrote most directly using his sources, in this case, Plutarch's lives of these various characters, Coriolanus, Julius Caesar, Antony, and Marcus Brutus. Now, I realize you may have other editions of Shakespeare, and people always ask me, can I use other editions? And the answer is obviously yes. Let me just explain one aspect of that too. It may come as a surprise to you that there is no standard edition of Shakespeare. That is to say, every edition of Shakespeare is edited. They all involve making choices, amending the text. It will really surprise you. Maybe we'll talk about it at a couple of points to find out that no two editions of Shakespeare even have the same text. And in particular, the lines vary from edition to edition because almost all Shakespeare's plays have prose in them and they don't have the same line numbers. So there will be a convenience to using the Signet editions. I will make reference to page numbers in them. We will then be all on the same page and to line numbers. The lines aren't that far off. So again, if you want to use another edition, it's no disaster. Well, I'll just mention there's an advantage to using the Signets, and they are cheap. The course requirements will be 2 papers, 8 to 10 pages each, and a final exam, not a take-home. We're going to avoid that problem. My office is next to that guy. I really try. Tell the mobs, one door over. And the exam will have 3 parts: 1, identification of passages from the plays, and then 2 essay questions. You'll have choice in the essay questions. Each paper counts 30% of the final grade, and the final exam counts 40%. I've set up the paper due dates, the first one October 11th, the second one November 29th. As it happens, I have to be in New York on November 29th, but I'm assuming we will have teaching fellows by then, and I'm going to leave. I want to meet with them before specifying any more rules about the papers. Looks like we'll need 2 or 3 of them, and I'm going to get to work on getting teaching fellows going. I don't know when discussion sections will begin. Again, it's a little difficult for a visiting professor. Usually your teaching fellows are your own graduate students. I couldn't afford to bring them along with me, and you wouldn't have wanted them anyway. So it may take me a while to get teaching fellows. We'll work on that. I do want I've set the course up so that we should be having discussion in class periodically. That is, I do lecture, but I will periodically pause to take questions. I'm hoping, given the schedule, that we'll have at least 15 minutes at the end of every class for open discussion. Do feel free to raise your hand if something is going totally haywire in my lecture and you don't know what I'm talking about. I will reserve the right to say, oh, I'm going to get to that point in a few minutes, or let's talk about that in private or something like that. But again, do free to raise questions as I go along. But I hope I will periodically remember to stop and ask for questions. Any questions right now about that sort of thing? Course requirements, procedures? Yes.
Well, it has more to do with just the class in general. Will you, since, or my question is, will you be also teaching this course in future, or is this the only year you'll be offering?
I think this is the last time. I've been giving it every 5 years. I don't think that if you want to take this course, now's the time to take it. I certainly won't be giving it next year. Now, any other questions? Okay, now again, for the moment and probably for the whole semester, the best way to reach me is my University of Virginia email address. So it's PAC, the number 2J at Virginia EDU. Again, I came up here with a flash drive and an iPad, basically as traveling light. And it's lucky I did, because they're all working, having a little problem getting my computer set up over in Cantor. So as some of you have already discovered, you'll get quick replies if you contact me there. I will have office hours after this class. I'll hang around a bit, and then we'll head over to Cantor. I'll be there Tuesdays, Thursdays, 3:45 to 5 p.m. Okay, again, any other questions about the nitty-gritty details? Okay, let me then give you an overview of the class, what we're doing. I'm going to present this, as if this is all settled. It's my way of showing I have thought about this stuff. Been thinking about this stuff for a good part of my life. But I don't lecture from notes. There's going to be a lot of improvisation. I know that your questions are going to send me off in new directions. But I do want to give you a sense of what we will be doing in the course and the various sorts of questions we will be asking. The course is not arranged chronologically in the sense that we're not starting with Shakespeare's early works and moving towards his later ones. In fact, we're beginning with Coriolanus, perhaps the last tragedy he wrote, and certainly one of his later plays. The plays are arranged roughly in historical order, by which I mean Shakespeare's understanding of human history as it moved from ancient Rome to the modern world. So the first unit really will consist of Shakespeare's Roman plays, Coriolanus, Julius Caesar, and Antony and Cleopatra. And these are themselves a very interesting illustration of this principle of the regime. Because what interested Shakespeare in these plays is the movement from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. That, in my view, is what organizes these plays into a trilogy. That is, Coriolanus portrays the early days of the Roman Republic. Julius Caesar portrays that great crisis moment when, in effect, the Republic collapsed and the empire emerged. And Antony and Cleopatra looks at the emergence of the imperial regime as the man we know as Octavius Caesar is moving on his way to becoming Augustus, the first Roman emperor. And what we will see is how human life changes as Rome changes from a republic to an empire. So we'll begin with Coriolanus, which is set very early in the history of the Roman Republic. The characters in the play all remember living under a kingship, under rule by these Etruscan foreigners, and above all Tarquin the Proud, the so-called tyrant who was expelled. These are people who very much have just established a republic. Moreover, and here I really think Shakespeare shows his political acumen in choosing this subject matter. He understood that the tribunate, this Roman institution of the tribunes, was key to the republic. And the play begins with the plebeians in Rome in revolt, and they are satisfied when they're given representatives, these so-called tribunes, who get to speak for their power in the Roman regime. I think Shakespeare understood that this was the creation of the Roman Republic in its fullest articulation once the people had these tribunes as their representatives. Now, don't panic if you don't know Roman history. I don't know it all that well. In fact, some of you probably know it better than I do. But I will fill you in the rough outlines of Roman history as we move along. Machiavelli's discourses will help you. There's always Wikipedia if all else fails. Just good article on tribunes there. Anyway, what we see in Coriolanus is what made this Roman Republic work. And here's where Shakespeare fits into the broader outline of political theory, and that is in some ways, again, one of the focuses of this course is on Rome as a political problem. And it's extraordinary how much of political theory has been articulated in terms of the question of Rome. Machiavelli is the founder of modern political theory, devotes much of his career to meditating on Roman history. Many of the great political thinkers have written about Rome. Montesquieu is a great example. Just look at the Federalist Papers. You will see how much of the original thinking of the Founding Fathers involved reflecting on Rome and its history as a republic. What Rome meant to Shakespeare and to people of his day was the height of political achievement. Even today, we're very impressed with Rome. We still have TV shows and movies set in Rome. In our science fiction, people go to other planets and they find Roman emperors there. Rome is one of the foundational elements in our culture and civilization. Yet it loomed even larger in Shakespeare's day. The remnants of the Roman Empire they're still visible today, but they were even more prominent in a way in Shakespeare's day. The people of England could still see Hadrian's Wall in the north. They thought of the Tower of London as having originally been built by Julius Caesar. They remembered that they were once a Roman colony. All over Europe, Rome seemed to represent the peak of political achievement in the sense that the Roman Empire looked like the largest empire that anybody had put together. You had this peculiar institution of the Holy Roman Emperor in Shakespeare's Europe. Henry VIII had finagled, tried to become Holy Roman Emperor, but failed. Now we all know the joke that the Holy Roman Empire was neither Holy Roman nor an empire. But it does reflect the fact that people in Shakespeare's day look back upon Rome as a model of political achievement and hopes the highest aspiration one could have would be to somehow recreate the Roman Empire in modern terms. Now, empire is going to be one of the great themes of this course. We're going to look at Shakespeare's understanding of the problem of empire, and that fundamentally began with his understanding of Rome and the Roman Empire. And there were many political units in Shakespeare's day aspiring to empire, England being one of them. And we'll see this when we get to Henry V. But when people thought about empire, and again, this is right after the discovery of the New World, this is at the peak of the Spanish Empire, more properly understood as the Habsburg Empire. It's the time of the Ottoman Empire as a major power in Europe. People were thinking a lot about empire, and when they thought empire, they thought Rome. And they wondered, how did this little city, basically started out as a backwater in Italy, more or less a swamp, how did it turn into this world power? And Shakespeare is very interested in this question, as Machiavelli was. And in particular, what struck people about the Roman Republic was the popular element in it. That the people of Rome the common people of Rome had an unusually large role to play in Roman politics. And that looked strange to people, especially to people living under a monarchy. And so we'll look at that in looking at, Shakespeare seems particularly interested in Coriolanus in the question of the popular element of the Roman regime. We will see how Rome functions and how it does not function in Coriolanus. We will see the problems that eventually led to the end of the Republic, but also some of the things that made it succeed. There's a gap of almost 450 years of history between Coriolanus and Julius Caesar. And we're going to see that Shakespeare presents the Roman Republic as very problematic. It has a lot of problems, and yet that regime lasted over 400 years. You know, we're very proud of the American regime and our Constitution and the fact that we've had the same Constitution since 1789, but we're only in our 3rd century as a regime. And before we start patting ourselves too much on the back, we might think about the Roman regime, which lasted over 4 centuries. And that's the sort of question Shakespeare is asking about it. So we'll begin with Coriolanus and, in effect, the birth of the Roman Republic. Then in Julius Caesar, we will look at the moment when one-man rule emerges in Rome, when this one man, Julius Caesar, manages to outfox all his rivals and is on the verge of becoming the single ruler of Rome. Now, at this point, he is killed. He's killed by men who remain loyal to the old republic and do not like the emergence of one-man rule in Rome. So we'll look at the issue of republic versus empire in Julius Caesar as it's articulated by the characters, and discuss how Rome has changed since the days of Coriolanus that make it seem almost inevitable that one-man rule emerges in the city. And so we'll both look at Julius Caesar's great achievements and also his limitations and defects, and similarly with the conspirators against him, particularly Brutus and Cassius, what makes them great Romans, but also what ultimately makes that conspiracy fail. And then we'll look at the consequences of that in Antony and Cleopatra, which in many ways does look like a sequel to Julius Caesar. It has the figure of Mark Antony as one element of continuity. And I want to look there at how the imperial regime changes vis-a-vis the Republican regime, and in particular how human life changes. We will see in Coriolanus how the Republic is a machine for producing political men, that it works to keep human beings, men and women, focused on politics, on political life, on the life of the city, that it keeps even the religion within the bounds of the city and focused on civil life, how it produces a kind of austere way of life. In Antony and Cleopatra, we will see the fun begin. As the Republican regime dissolves, the new imperial regime, above all, encourages erotic life. Hence, Antony and Cleopatra, one of the great love stories in Shakespeare. It's interesting, even if you look at our popular culture, we do carry around kind of two contradictory stereotypes of Rome. When we think of Rome, we think of armies on the march, we think of a Spartan-like existence, of austerity, of men who are great warriors, who are unchallenged on the battlefield. And on the other hand, we think of the unspeakable decadence of Romans like Nero and Caligula. We think of orgies. We think of the total self-indulgence. And, you know, you might ask yourself, how can this be the same Rome? Well, in some ways, those two images correspond to the Republic and the Empire. That is, the austere Rome, the fighting machine of our popular imagination, that is the Rome of the Republic. These decadent figures are the Roman emperors. That's why I mentioned Nero who, by the way, was descended from Mark Antony and Caligula and all these incredibly decadent Roman emperors. Now, the Roman armies managed to maintain their discipline even in the empire. The empire lasted several centuries as a regime, despite its corruption. So I don't want to make this contrast absolute. But generally, when you're speaking of Roman virtue and Roman discipline, you're thinking of the Republic. When you're thinking Roman decadence, you're thinking of the empire. And that's a perfect example of this issue of the regime. The Republican regime breeds a kind of austere way of life devoted to politics. The imperial regime, in fact, tries to move people away from politics, to get them interested in something else, and what's better to do that than the erotic life of Antony and Cleopatra. So I'm going to view these three Roman plays as a trilogy that in effect trace the rise and fall of the Roman Republic. And it is interesting that Shakespeare seems to be largely interested in the Roman Republic. That is something that distinguishes him in his own day and may point to the philosophical nature of his thinking. That is, there was a great fascination with the Roman Empire, as I've already said, beginning in the Italian Renaissance and including in Renaissance England. You had a lot of monarchs in Europe who were aspiring to a kind of Roman status, to an imperial status. Yet Shakespeare shows a peculiar interest in the Republic, shown particularly by his choice of writing a play about Coriolanus. Julius Caesar, one of the most famous figures in human history, very famous in the Renaissance. If you find, Cleopatra, very famous figure, Mark Antony. If you've never heard, how many of you have heard of Coriolanus before? Okay, so yeah, I mean, he is a relatively obscure figure in history, and the fact that Shakespeare chose to, I'm going to write 3 plays about Rome. One of them is going to be about Coriolanus. I can see the guys at the theater company saying, "Come on, Bill, can't you find somebody more famous than that?" But oh no, this is the early Republic. I want to show that. You'll see, it'll work out. And it does show, I think it's evidence for his particular fascination with the phenomenon of republics. Now again, this challenges a common understanding of Shakespeare and politics. Again, most people who talk about Shakespeare and politics see his mind confined to the orbit of monarchy. He lived under a monarchy. The idea is that's all he knew and all he could imagine. I think that's a very limiting view of Shakespeare and does not appreciate how wide-ranging his thinking was. And as we'll see in this course, both with the Roman Republic and the Venetian Republic, Shakespeare was peculiarly interested in republics. Now again, this view seems very odd to many literary critics who are historically minded, because again, they'll say Shakespeare lived under a monarchy. What could he know of republics? Well, in fact, one aspect of the Italian Renaissance was the revival not just of republics in what we now call Italy, places like Florence, places like Venice, but the revival of Republican thinking, which again is something you see in Machiavelli's discourses on Livy. If you read a lot of writing about Shakespeare, you will get the impression that no one had even heard of a republic in Shakespeare's day and that all people knew were monarchies. Well, 3 decades after Shakespeare died, England was a republic. Didn't last very long, fewer than 20 years, but in the English Civil Wars in the 1640s, the Roundheads defeated the Cavaliers, and Oliver Cromwell became the dictator of what started out as a republic in England. Now, how did that happen? Where did that republic come from? If no one had ever heard of republics in the England of Shakespeare's day, how 3 decades later is England a republic? There was a great deal, evidently, of buried republican thinking. People under a monarchy, and under a pretty strict monarchy, particularly under the Stuarts, under James and Charles I, you weren't going to get many people publishing things in favor of Republican government in Shakespeare's day. But obviously people were becoming aware of the Republican alternative because they embraced it not too many decades later. It's one reason why it's very hard to pin down Shakespeare's actual knowledge of Machiavelli. It's now clear that Machiavelli's discourses circulated in English translation in manuscript in Shakespeare's day. It was not published in English translation. For that matter, there's good evidence that Shakespeare could read Italian anyway. But we now know that manuscripts of the Machiavelli's discourses were circulating as early as the 1590s, I believe. So people were being exposed to Republican thinking, and Shakespeare is one example of that. So our first unit will be on these 3 Roman plays, and then with a shock, we'll plunge right into the world of English monarchy in Henry V. And we will see how different monarchy is. In particular, we will see how different monarchy is in a Christian world. And indeed, it will be something of a shock to you. In the very first scene you'll read of Henry V, you'll see an archbishop and a bishop very involved in English politics, making a deal with Henry V to support his campaign against France in return for the church being let off from certain possible taxation. And indeed, we'll see throughout this play, Henry V, the way in which Christianity complicates politics. That's going to be another one of the central themes of this course. The Roman world is a pagan world, and we will see how deeply that influences the way of life of the characters. In particular, the fact that an afterlife is not an option to Shakespeare's Romans. The only way they can be immortal is to achieve fame, and that means to do great deeds for their city. It's one reason they are so impelled to political life. It offers the highest form of satisfaction. It offers the only form of immortality available to these pagans. We're going to see this change in Antony and Cleopatra. And I won't talk about that too much now, but we're going to see how Antony and Cleopatra actually points ahead to the emerging Christian world. But in Henry V, we will see again and again how Christianity changes the terms of politics. How Henry V as a king is faced with issues of conscience, is faced with issues of the soul, of what happens to the soul of his soldiers, what happens to the soul of himself. So, the main changes we will be hit with when we reach Henry V are the difference of monarchy as opposed to republic and the difference of Christianity and paganism. Let me, just to get Machiavelli in the ballgame here, let me read you what to me is the most astounding passage in all of Machiavelli's discourses, and one that I believe registered with Shakespeare. You can look it up. It's on page 131 of your edition. That makes it Book 2, Chapter 2 of the Discourses. Here Machiavelli somewhat disingenuously reflects on the differences between the ancient pagan world and the modern Christian world he lives in. And he's struck by the fact that the ancient pagans had freedom. And they were stronger, by which he means they participated in political life. He's meditating on the lack of participation in political life among modern Christians and wondering why, and indeed he attributes it to Christianity. Thinking then whence it can arise that in those ancient times peoples were more lovers of freedom than in these. And again, by freedom he means there human agency, that they participate, they like to participate in their political life. I believe it arises from the same cause that makes men less strong now. Moderns are weak for Machiavelli, and the ancient pagans were strong, which I believe is the difference between our education and the ancient, founded on the difference between our religion and the ancient. And here religion enters politics, and we'll be watching this throughout this course. For our religion, by which he means Christianity, having shown the truth and the true way. He puts that in there to make sure no one takes him out and burns him. Our religion, our religion's the true one, makes us esteem less the honor of the world, whereas the Gentiles, meaning the pagans, esteeming it very much, and having placed the highest good in it, were more ferocious in their actions. This contrast is fundamental to Shakespeare's understanding of the contrast between the ancient pagans and the modern Christians. This can be inferred from many of their institutions, beginning from the magnificence of their sacrifices as against the humility of ours, and skipping a bit. Besides this, the ancient religion did not beatify men if they were not full of worldly glory, as were captains of armies and princes of republics. So that's it. The ancient world, it's really sly of Machiavelli to use the word beatify here. The ancient world made saints of captains of armies, of princes of republics, of people who were filled with worldly glory. The very opposite of what you're supposed to do in Christianity. The ancient religion did not beatify men if they were not full of worldly glory, as were captains of armies and princes of republics. Our religion has glorified humble and contemplative more than active men. It has then placed the highest good in humility, abjectness, and contempt of things human. The other, the ancients, placed it in greatness of spirit, strength of body, and all other things capable of making men very strong. And if our religion asks that you have strength in yourself, it wishes you to be capable more of suffering than of doing something wrong. This mode of life thus seems to have rendered the world weak and given it in prey to criminal men who can manage it securely, seeing that the collectivity of men, so as to go to paradise, think more of enduring their beatings than of avenging them. As I like to put it in the ancient world, the Greek shall inherit the earth. In the modern Christian world, the meek shall inherit the earth. And that's a very profound contrast we'll be looking at here. And Machiavelli sees everything turning on this new introduction of the idea of paradise, of the afterlife, that changes people's evaluation of politics. And we will see that again and again in this course. So, we will look how Christianity alters the terms of politics in Henry V. At the same time, though, there's a great survival of ancient Rome even in Henry V. You'll see that the fifth act begins with a chorus comparing Henry V's victory over the French at the Battle of Agincourt with a Roman triumph, and even comparing it with a contemporary event in Shakespeare's England, perhaps the return of the Earl of Essex from his wars in Ireland. So Rome still provides a standard of political glory in Henry V. You'll see a character, a Welshman named Llewellyn, who keeps talking about the rules of Roman warfare and how we have to keep using them. So Henry V will be a good introduction to the heart of Shakespeare's understanding of his own day, what we call the Renaissance. People didn't use that term then, but Shakespeare did have an understanding of the phenomenon we call the Renaissance. The Renaissance, that's French for rebirth, revival. And what it was a rebirth of classical antiquity. Shakespeare is very much aware, in looking at a figure like Henry V, the extent to which the Renaissance represented an attempt to revivify, recreate certain Roman institutions and Roman ways of life within the Christian context of the modern world. And that leads to very problematic situations, as we'll see there, but even more so in the tragedies. We'll then read our one comedy in the course, Merchant of Venice, but it's a very serious comedy, and one which deals with the Republic of Venice, another republic. Shakespeare he wrote two plays set in Venice. We'll read both of them, Othello being the other one. he seems to have been really interested in this revival of the Republican form of government in his day. The Roman Republic he could only read about. The Venetian Republic existed. There are weird theories that he may have visited Venice. If you go to Venice, part of their tourist trade, they'll show you where Desdemona's house was. They try to show you that Shakespeare had actually been there. I find that somewhat dubious, but I'm sure he met many Venetian merchants. Venice was at that point on the decline, but it was still a major economic power in Europe. It had been the major economic power in Europe before the fall of the Byzantine Empire and before the discovery of the New World. Venice had controlled the trade routes to the east for many centuries. So there's no question that Shakespeare would have met Venetian merchants in London. And that's how, in fact, he learned a lot about the city. It's pretty amazing. He knows points of interest in Venice. That's led people to think he actually must have been there. But I think all he had to do was meet a Venetian merchant and learn about where the Rialto was and something like that. But anyway, it's a phenomenon that was very meaningful and in some sense present to him, certainly contemporary to him. And we will see the peculiar nature of the Venetian Republic. That is, that it is a commercial republic. The Roman Republic was largely a military republic, and its greatness rested on its military might and its military achievements. Venice was one of the great trading cities of late medieval and early Renaissance Europe, and Shakespeare is very aware of that. The play is The Merchant of Venice. And in particular, as a result of Venice's commercial interests, the city was open to a wider variety of human beings than most cities or communities in Europe of its day. And in The Merchant of Venice, that means Venice has Jews in the city. Now, at the time Shakespeare was writing, Jews had long since been outlawed in England. They were not legally allowed to live in England. Now, there are lots of theories about that. Undoubtedly, there were Jews in Shakespeare's London. He probably had met some Jews, or at least Jews who converted to Christianity. Again, he seems to show a knowledge of Judaism in the play that would be surprising to someone who had never met a Jew. But in any case, Venice was one of the few communities at this time which allowed Jews to live openly as Jews in the city. Spain had famously expelled its Jews in 1492, for example, and many of them went to Venice at that time. So Shakespeare is particularly interested in Venice as a peculiarly cosmopolitan community. One aspect of its being a commercial republic is that it's open to different religions at a time when much of Europe consisted of purely Christian communities. Shakespeare shows how problematic that is. He shows the ways in which, for example, the Jew in The Merchant of Venice is effectively a second-class citizen. Venice claims to admit Jews, but does not, in fact, give them full rights in the city. And so this is a play that explores modern politics in very profound ways, raises issues about the viability of republicanism, the viability of a commercial republic. In some ways, Shakespeare is looking ahead in that play to forms of government that are much more familiar to us, such as the United States, in many ways a commercial republic, which practices religious toleration. And again, the issue of religion in politics comes up in The Merchant of Venice when this republic is faced with mediating a conflict between Christians and Jews in the city. Now, we will then conclude with three of Shakespeare's most famous tragedies, Hamlet, Othello, and Macbeth. I'm doing only 8 plays in this course, so we'll have time to read them in depth, discuss them in depth. Again, I'll talk a lot about the plays, but I hope to leave a lot of time open for you to talk about them as well. In Hamlet, we will see again the problem of Christianity in politics. I will offer the thesis that Hamlet's main problem as a political figure is his Christianity. It again very much complicates his understanding of the politics of Denmark. Hamlet's famously a revenge play, and revenge is perhaps the issue on which the ancient pagans and the modern Christians most clearly conflict. Revenge is an ethical obligation in the ancient pagan world. You'll see that in the Roman plays. The most famous example of it would be Homer's Iliad, which turns on the idea that Achilles has to avenge the death of his friend Patroclus. Again and again, you see in ancient literature revenge as the fundamental ethical obligation. Aeschylus's trilogy, the Oresteia, would be an example of that. Christianity forbids revenge. It sees it as one of the great sins. And I'll argue that Hamlet is as fascinating as it is, in part because it turns precisely on the flashpoint between classical ethics, ancient pagan ethics, and modern Christianity. That Hamlet's torn between an obligation to commit revenge and a sense that as a Christian he's forbidden to do so. And we will look at the politics of Shakespeare's Denmark, which again is more realistic and interesting than people might think, and how again the Christian disposition of Hamlet makes it very problematic for him to be a ruler in the city. He is peculiarly cosmopolitan. He has contempt for Danish customs. His last official act, he appoints a Norwegian as the Danish king, as we'll see. That follows from his Christianity, that and his greater interest in the afterlife than in this world. But again, that play is saturated with memories of the Roman world. Polonius played Julius Caesar when he was in college. The play is haunted by memories of the classical world. In many ways, Hamlet is attracted to it, tries to imitate it, but in many ways his Christianity works against that. Then, with Othello, we'll return to Venice, and a similar problematic of this commercial republic. The intersection of commerce and religion is key in both plays. Venice is a commercial city. That means it requires a money market, and yet Christians are forbidden to take interest from fellow Christians. That's why Venice needs Jews, and why they bring Shylock into the city but never make him a full citizen, because they use him for a purpose, namely interest-taking, that they despise. Something similar occurs in Othello. As we will see there, Venice is menaced by the Turks. Again, one thing I'll try to give you a sense of is the power of the Ottoman Empire in the 17th century. We don't think of it as a player in world history, but in the 17th century it is by no means clear that the Ottoman Empire wouldn't triumph over Christian Europe and turn the whole of the Mediterranean into an Ottoman lake. And so in Othello, the Turkish threat is very real, and these peaceful Christian merchants hire a Turk to defend them against the Turks. That's who Othello is. Now, it doesn't matter to Venice that Othello, in fact, is a Christian and very much thinks of himself as a Christian. They think of him as this barbarian they've hired to deal with these barbarian Turks. And so he too ends up in a very problematic situation in this seemingly tolerant and all-embracing community, as shown here concretely by the fact that the Venetians are happy to have this man leading their armies, but they don't want him marrying their daughters. And when he tries to be fully integrated into the Christian community by marrying Desdemona, all hell breaks loose in the play. So again, it's Shakespeare's examination of the possibility of a commercial republic, but also the problematic, in this case, the actual tragic results of it. And Othello, very interesting figure. Many of the figures in this play, in this course, are warriors. Shakespeare was fascinated by warriors. In his day, being a warrior was more fundamental to being a political leader than it is today, though even in the history of our country, many of our presidents made their reputations in war, made their reputation as generals. And Shakespeare is very interested in the problematic relation between war and peace. One of the deepest tragic facts in Shakespeare is that what makes you a good warrior does not make you succeed in domestic politics. We'll see that beginning with Coriolanus, but we'll see it again in Othello, we'll see it in Macbeth as well. And in Othello, we'll see the very great difficulty this hero has making the transition from war to peace. By the way, it's the thing that Henry V does so well. It's why his story is not tragic, why it has a kind of comic or happy outcome, because he is able to move from war to peace. And we'll have to talk about, very unusual, one of the few heroes in Shakespeare who is able to make that transition. Othello is not. Othello is a man who wanders from the heroic world of the battlefield into a Venetian bourgeois and is totally discombobulated by the transition, especially when this guy Iago is around to make it so difficult for him. We'll then end with Macbeth. Macbeth, a story of another classical type hero, a great warrior whose life is profoundly complicated by the new Christian context of his action. At the beginning of the play, Macbeth is widely praised for cutting a man in half. People think this is just great. What? Let's make him Thane of Cantor. He just cut a guy in half. And then, he kills Duncan, and suddenly everybody's bent out of shape over that. He's so wonderful and praised as a murderer, and now suddenly people think he's a villain because of it. And indeed, he is another figure like Henry V, like Hamlet, who is puzzled by a Christian conscience, who's asked to do terrible deeds in war, brutal deeds in war, and then told not to do them in peacetime, to have a bad conscience about them. And we'll see Macbeth presented as a kind of Achilles figure, a great classical warrior who's now introduced into a Christian world. At one point, he says with some wistfulness and regret, it used to be, Shakespeare writes this better, but used to be you killed people and they stayed dead, but now they come back. Beats the hell out of me. We'll see, it's very, in some ways a monologue. How many of you have read the Iliad? Oh, good. Some ways I'm going to ask you throughout the course to hold in mind Achilles' killing of Hector, this act of revenge. And I'll ask you again and again to think what Achilles does not do. When he kills Hector, he does not wonder, is he going to heaven or hell? Do I have to kill him only when he's going to go to hell? Might I be sending him to heaven? All he's thinking about is killing the body of Hector, and there's no issue of Hector's soul. Nor does he wonder, is he going to come back? After 3 days, is he going to bounce back and I'll have to fight him again? Hamlet has to ask that first question when he considers killing Claudius, am I sending him to hell or heaven? Macbeth, when he's thinking of killing Banquo, has to ask, is he going to come back? This is, in some ways, very simply what I mean when I talk about the very complex issue of how a Christian worldview differs from an ancient pagan worldview and what an impact it has on these characters. So in Macbeth, we will be looking at the peculiar torment of a man who in some ways is leading the life of a pagan warrior, and then all these strange new factors represented by a bunch of witches come into the picture. So, okay, that's basically an outline of what we'll be doing. Any questions?